Reports surfaced on Tuesday that Jake Merklinger has received a new contract ahead of the 2025 season. This comes after Joey Aguilar had transferred to Tennessee from UCLA last week amidst Tennessee losing to Maliava to UCLA. Tennessee now has 3 quarterbacks on the roster in Joey Aguilar, Merklinger, and George MacIntyre. I think the consensus was that with the transfer, Aguilar was going to start, but now with Merklinger receiving this new contract, that's kind of up in the air. So today's tough question is actually pretty simple, and I'll start with you, Jimmy. Are we sure Joey Aguilar is going to be the starter at Tennessee?
I don't know that I would say I'm sure. I think that's the plan. Here's a guy that's played 2 years in junior college. He played 2 years at Appalachian State. He threw for well over, 6,800 yards or so at Appy State. 33 touchdowns and 10 interceptions one year, 24 touchdowns, 23 and 14 the other year. He's got a lot of playing experience. So I think the plan is for him to start and then for Merklinger to be the backup because, frankly, he may not be ready. And certainly MacIntyre as a true freshman is not ready. So I think that's the way the plan is. I think they upped Merklinger a little bit just to ensure that he wouldn't transfer. I think that was a part of it. Not so much to say you're the starter. Now, I will say this. I think he'll compete to be the starter, but I don't think the additional money was designed for him to be the starter.
Doesn't that somewhat seem like a misuse of NIL funds, though? Because if Aguilar is their plan to be the starter, well, he's going to be gone next year, but they're going to have an open competition between Merklinger, MacIntyre, and Faison Brandon coming in. It'd be a little odd to think that they would waste NIL resources, which I feel like, I don't know how you feel. I think Tennessee's a little bit behind on NIL money as it is, more than they're letting us on.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know what kind of a bump or what kind of a raise Merklinger got. If they gave him $500,000 in additional money, yeah. If they gave him $100,000, I would say no. I think it was a kind of an insurance policy to say, we don't want you to transfer. We're bringing in this other quarterback and we don't need you to leave. And one reason we're bringing another quarterback is they need depth at the quarterback position. So we don't need to bring in a quarterback and you leave. That puts us back down to 2 scholarship quarterbacks. So I think it was more a move to try to persuade him to not leave Tennessee. And then, and look, I'll say this with Merklinger. If he outperforms Aguilar during the summer camp, then he could very well be the starter. So he's going to get the chance to compete as a starter. But I would be surprised if Aguilar doesn't win the job.
And are we sure Josh Heupel's going to give a fair shot to Merklinger? Because don't we have a little bit of a history, unfortunately, with Josh Heupel that he seems to pick his quarterbacks early and then gives them every unfair chance to win, i.e. Joe Milton, Hendon Hooker?
That's the only example I can think of. If I think back to Central Florida, I mean, Dylan Gabriel started pretty early in his career. He had other quarterbacks along the way. So I think there is one example. Beyond that, I'm not sure if there is one. So do I think he'll get a fair shot? I do. I do remember this, and Heupel has said this multiple times. He has said, we will have a quarterback ready. Now, who's that going to be? And here's the other thing, too. If you have a quarterback ready, Caleb, are you going to have to, maybe I shouldn't say dummy down, are you going to have to simplify the offense a little bit for a quarterback that's coming in basically in the summer, or for a quarterback that maybe isn't quite ready to jump in and be a starter because he hadn't been in the system very long either and he's young? So I wonder if they would simplify some things with what they're doing on offense for either one of the quarterbacks that starts.
Yeah, but how much do they really have to simplify this offense for quarterbacks? Isn't it kind of just a one-read safety, look one side of the field, and then make your decision, pretty much?
It is. It's a lot of reading. The quarterback's doing a lot of reading. The receivers are doing a lot of reading. And so maybe instead of doing as much reading, they tell the guy, you're running a 7-yard out. Instead of, now, you're going to run a 7-yard out if he does this, or you're going to run a 7-yard slant, or you're going to run a go route, depending on what they do. So much of this is based on reading what the defense is doing, reading what the secondary is doing. I think that's one reason we have seen young first-year receivers at Tennessee struggle, because there's so much reading involved with what the defense is doing to make sure you're on the same page with the quarterback. And if you're not on the same page with the quarterback, it could lead to an interception or a pick six. So I think the complexity of the offense is the fact that they ask the quarterback and the receiver to read the defenses rather than this is a route you're running. And so I wonder if they will put in more predetermined routes as opposed to reading defenses.
Right. And to your point earlier, by the way, an interesting point you brought up, the Dillon Gabriel situation. Josh Heupel, the mistake he made there was he got Dillon Gabriel, but he went and got Brandon Wimbush out of Notre Dame. And that was a mistake by Josh Heupel because I think he did start Brandon Wimbush the first game and was like, oh, nope, Dillon Gabriel's better. But actually, we talked about this last week, and I just wanted to bounce this off you. You know, you think about Josh Heupel. Let's look at his most successful quarterbacks: Hendon Hooker, McKenzie Milton, Drew Lock when he was at Missouri. Since he's basically developed this, I guess you call Art Briles air raid combination offense, which he developed at Missouri. Outside of Dillon Gabriel, he hasn't had an elite quarterback that he signed, has he?
No, he is not. That almost goes to some of the players he's inherited at Tennessee. That some of the better receivers he's had at Tennessee were the ones he inherited, like Jalen Hyatt. Some of the better offensive linemen they've had are ones they inherited, like Cooper Mays and Spraggan. So that is interesting. I don't know a really good answer to that as to why. Maybe the trend stops this year. You know, well, no, it won't stop this year. Aguilar's coming in, so he might be the starter. So yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it, but there's a lot of truth to it. And why, I don't know. But I do think that Locke was an elite college talent. I don't know that I thought Hooker was an elite college talent until Tennessee and Heupel got a hold of him, because Virginia Tech didn't seem all that interested in keeping him, right?
They didn't, but just anecdotally, I know some Virginia Tech fans who very much sided with Hendon Hooker over Justin Fuente when Hendon Hooker transferred out. They felt Justin Fuente kind of railroaded Hendon Hooker to a certain degree.
Yeah. And big mistake by Fuente, no question.
Yeah, exactly. The poll question is up, guys. Vote on it. Hit that like and subscribe button if you can. Who will start for Tennessee at quarterback this year? Joey Aguilar, Jake Merklinger, George MacIntyre. We're going to continue with this conversation in a second, but first, a quick message from Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones.
Welcome back. Jimmy, let me play something off you real quick with Jake Merklinger, if he's a starter, and an advantage you have if that happens. Which is to say, I don't know, I went through the roster yesterday, and outside of Chris Brazel and Lance Hurd and Miles Kitselman, those are the only three guys that we know will be rotational players. Pretty much nobody on this offense is going to be even eligible for the NFL draft next year. So they're all coming back, barring a transfer. If you do start Jake Merklinger, don't you at least get the advantage of, okay, you kind of have a young collection of offensive talent that can all get experience playing together, from Merklinger to Mike Matthews to David Sanders on the offensive line, and then they're all back in 2026 to build a certain level of rapport with each other.
So start Merklinger knowing that, ignoring the transfer portal, that you should have everybody coming back on offense, and you should be really good on offense in 2026. One problem with that is you don't get a grace period with your fan base very often, right? When Tennessee goes 6-6, I don't think a whole lot of fans are going to say, boy, I sure am glad he stood up to Nico and let him go. Good riddance. But so that's the thing. That's the risk that you run when you do that. Now, here's the other thing, too. In terms of starting, if I think Aguilar gives me the best chance to win, I'm going with him. But I'll try to differentiate this. Let's go on a scale of 1 to 10. If I put Aguilar on an 8 and I think Merklinger's a 6, I'm starting Aguilar. If I think Aguilar's a 7 and I think Merklinger's a 6.5, I might go with Merklinger because of what you said. So to me, it depends on the gap between those two.
And to your point, it's funny you say that because nowadays it's even worse because I talk about everybody coming back, but if you go 6-6, you're about to have a mass exodus into the transfer portal at that point of players leaving. And so I guess you're right. They kind of, it's at this point in year 5, Heupel doesn't really have much wiggle room anymore, does he?
No, and I don't think he's going to go 6-6. But I was just trying to make a point about you can't really afford to have a bad year. Now, I'm not that high on Tennessee anyway. I know that some people were saying they were college playoff contender with Nico. To be frank with you, I didn't put him in that category, and here's why. And I want to hear your counter argument to me. All right, Nico's gone now. Okay. Give me the position group that is better on this team than it was last year.
So offensively, my hot take is that I think the receivers will be better. And I know they lost everybody, but I think with Squirrel White playing with a separated shoulder and Brew McCoy never getting back really fully 100% last year, I think it was a mistake to start those two guys last year. And so I think they'll upgrade with Mike Matthews and assuming Braylon Staley is in the slot. So that's offensively.
And Brazel having a breakout year?
Yes. And because my understanding, one of Nico's problems, and this would be good for Heupel if he starts Joey Aguilar, they really wanted Nico to throw more jump balls to Chris Brazel last year, and he was always uncomfortable throwing to a guy that was guarded that way. And those are some reports I've heard from some people, and they think that whatever you want to say about Aguilar, I saw some of his tape. Jimmy, he's a gun. He's almost Brett Favre without the arm strength, honestly.
Well, he threw 24 interceptions the last 2 years combined at Appy State. That's alarming. You probably like the receivers more than I do. I don't think the running backs can be as good without Dylan Sampson. I don't think the offensive line could be as good with 4 starters being lost. I don't think the defensive line could be as good when you lose Pierce and Omar Lott. The linebackers, maybe. The secondary, I don't think so. Especially when you don't know when McCoy's going to come back. My point is, and maybe you're right about receiver, but that would be it, right? There's not another position group that's better in 2025 than it was in 2024.
No, and if you go with position groups within position groups, so the linebackers have both players back. I think the linebackers will be better just by nature of experience with Carter and Thielander. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I mean, the offensive line will certainly not be better. There's a chance they're better off at tackle only because if Lance Hurd's fully healthy this year and is not playing with a sprained ankle. But I totally understand what you're saying. I said my prediction, though, with quarterback specifically, to get back to that, is that I think with Joey Aguilar, if they start him, my take is they'll be better than they were last year at quarterback, but they won't be as good as they would have been with Nico this year at quarterback. Does that make sense?
Yes. I agree completely. That's the same way I would assess it. Yeah.
That I think so too. So the poll question up, guys. Who will start for Tennessee quarterback this year? Joey Aguilar at 64% and Jake Merklinger at 34% and George MacIntyre at 2%. And Jimmy, we're not really talking about George MacIntyre. I know he's probably not ready, but he's probably got the most raw talent of any of these guys, doesn't he?
He might. I'd like to see a little bit more of him. He is rail thin. I think his family would really like for him to redshirt because they understand that physically he's probably not ready for the rigors of the SEC. The Merklinger thing is interesting. I think Merklinger's a good athlete. I think he's a good runner. He looked a little bit sporadic with his passing in the spring and in the spring game. He's got a good enough arm. It's just the accuracy part of it's a concern. But you know what? The accuracy part's a little bit of a concern for me for Aguilar because what did he complete last year at Appy State? 56%?
Yeah, it was something
now,
like that.
I called somebody that has some knowledge about Appy State, and they said he just didn't have a very good supporting cast. That was the reason his completion percentage was so low. But he is tough as nails. He'll hang in the pocket. He'll run. He's a willing runner. And the toughness aspect is what this person liked as much as anything with Aguilar. So at least he brings that. But, yeah, to your assessment, I think they'd be better at quarterback with Nico. They're better at quarterback with Aguilar over Merklinger. And, I think MacIntyre has a lot of talent. I don't think he's ready. Merklinger should be closer to being ready because he's got one more year under his belt than does MacIntyre.
Yeah, and to your point, it kind of reminds me, I had gotten the same assessment of Aguilar. It reminds me, do you remember that I guess it was Casey Clausen's senior year when his completion percentage dipped dramatically. And I kind of looked back, felt bad for him because his best receiver he was thrown to was a converted quarterback in James Banks, and he had no running game because Cedric Houston was hurt half the season.
Yeah. So that certainly makes an impact. Now, before that, he had some really good receivers because he had in 2001, he had Kelly Washington and Dante Stallworth.
Yeah,
that's pretty strong. He also had a pretty fair tight end by the name of Jason Witten. So
he did.
Yeah, the weapons that you have can certainly impact the production of a quarterback.
Absolutely, definitely.